there are all these women, they're scrambling now because they feel like they have been wronged and they weren't told the information about HRT. Now let me hurry up and get on HRT, but then there's so much context. And HRT in its way may not be great for every woman at every certain time of her life. I mean, there's just so much nuance.
This is Next Level Health. I'm your host, Dr. Melinda Ring, Director of the Osher Center for Integrative Health at Northwestern University. On this show, we explore ways to take actionable steps towards optimizing our health with leaders in the integrative, functional, and lifestyle medicine fields who believe in science-backed and time-tested approaches to well-being. Let's take your health to the next level. What if the secret to better health, balanced hormones, and a brighter mood lies in the colors on your plate? Today on Next Level Health, we're diving into the fascinating science of eating the rainbow and how phytonutrients and colorful plant foods can do everything from support mitochondrial health to ease menopause symptoms and even elevate your emotional well-being. Our guest today, Dr. Deanna Minich, is a renowned nutrition scientist, certified functional medicine practitioner and teacher, and author of the new book, her 7th consumer book, The Rainbow Diet. She spent over 2 decades exploring how food influences not just our biology, but our psychology, our energy, and even our spiritual connection to health. Deanna, you and I share a deep belief in the healing power of food, especially when it's vibrant and beautiful and rooted in evidence. So for our listeners, if you've ever wondered how to use food to level up your health, balance hormones, or simply just feel more alive, you're in the right place. Deanna, I'm so happy to have you here. You ready to get into it?
I'm ready. I've been looking forward to this conversation. So let's dive in.
Let's dive in. So menopause, perimenopause having its moment, Oprah's all over it now even. So with all this attention that's happening on healthy aging and hormone balance, how do you think colorful foods can help women, especially in life stages like menopause, feel more vibrant and well?
I love that question. One of the things that I talk about in the new edition of the Rainbow Diet is how every color has an association in the body with a function. Mm-hmm. And when I think of menopause and perimenopause, I start thinking of inflammation, I start thinking of hormone balance, and also nourishing the brain. And the colors that correspond with those respective functional signatures are red for helping with inflammation and immune response, orange for helping with healthy hormones, and I'll talk a little bit more about that, and then blue, purple, black for helping with mood and brain health. So some of the interesting research on orange foods, and not many people know about this, but I actually did one of my graduate degrees at the University of Illinois at Chicago, and it was on carotenoids. So I spent 3 years studying plant pigments and the kind of pigments that make plants look pretty. So typically they are red, orange, or yellow. And the orange compounds would track to compounds like beta-carotene, which I'm sure most people have heard of, alpha-carotene, and another compound called beta-cryptoxanthin, which sounds kind of cryptic, but it actually is well recognized if you look at the science for women's health. So there are a few studies here, and one of them that comes to mind, as per your question, is that the study was looking at women and looking at ovarian reserves and looking at when women were going into more ovarian decline. And they found that for women eating more orange-colored fruits, rich in that beta-cryptoxanthin, they tended to have less ovarian decline than their counterparts, or at least they had a little bit of a buffer or reserve compared to other women. So if we look at the ovaries coincidentally do localize and concentrate 13 to 14 different carotenoids. So you actually have these colorful plant pigments in the ovaries, and they have a functional job there. They're helping with healthy ovulation. So when we think of the corpus luteum, the yellow body, moving into corpus albicans, right? The whole process of ovulation. what that is connected to is the presence of retinol, and retinol is vitamin A, and vitamin A comes from these carotenoids. But aside from vitamin A, it seems like some of these carotenoids are very supportive for the fat soluble tissues of the body, like the ovaries. So, ladies, what I would say is aim for those orange fruits, things like tangerines. I know not many people like persimmons, but tangerines, mangoes, persimmons, oranges, and try to aim for when they are in season. And I know in the Midwest, we don't always get oranges. Well, we get them through the year, but they're not always in season. But I think bringing them in occasionally is a really good idea to ensure that we get enough of those carotenoids that are nourishing the ovaries.
Can I just follow up on that? Because I do a lot of work in menopause also. And clearly, what you're talking about is how it's so important. Really, I think for me, it sounds like for fertility and the reproductive years, kind of like nourishing the ovaries, nourishing our reproductive system.
Yeah.
Is there still the same benefit after menopause when really, we're not shooting out that egg every month where women are maybe dealing with different issues or at that point, would you be like, no, now let's shift to the blue, purple ones that are going to help with your brain health and those sorts of things. Do you see a phased kind of approach to what color we should be having in different phases of our life?
I get your question. It's a great one. The short answer is we don't know. We don't know. The orange compounds that we have with beta cryptoxanthin, beta carotene, they're not only for the ovaries. They can help to support the other tissues of the body as well that are higher in fat. So if we think about a menopausal and even postmenopausal woman, where is she getting a lot of her estrogens from, a lot of her progesterone, a little bit from the adrenals, but the majority is coming from the fat tissue, right?
Right.
Adipose tissue becomes a huge depot. Well, what protects the adipose tissue and what do you find sinking into the adipose with all of that fat? You find the carotenoids there. And I think that that's a good thing because the carotenoids help with oxidative stress and inflammation. And we know that adipose tissue, as Dr. Jeff Bland would say, you can have happy fat and you can have angry fat. And what he means by that is the angry fat is more inflamed, and we're cranking out a lot of these inflammatory cytokines through the adipose tissue. So, not such a great thing. And that's where things like carotenoids that sink into fat tissue would be protective. And if women are thinking about their skin, I always get this question about skin and menopause. And people ask me, like, oh, what products do you use? I think that skin comes from within. And the carotenoids, there was a study on this specifically, and it was on a different set of carotenoids. So not the orange ones, but more the yellow ones like lutein and zeaxanthin, that when people were taking a supplement of this, it helped with the healthy hydration of the skin. So if you think of the skin as essentially you've got subcutaneous fat, you want to be protective of that tissue, especially if you're out in the sun and you don't want to wear a lot of sunscreen. I do think that bringing in those carotenoids helps not only with healthy ovaries, but healthy adipose tissue, healthy brain health, because this is also very lipid rich, healthy skin. So healthy breasts too. There have been some studies on looking at carotenoids and breast tissue. And then I also get the question, Melinda, about, do I take a supplement or do I aim for food? The data are a little bit tricky on supplements because when you just hammer on one carotenoid and you take a high dose of it, depending on your body and what else is going on, it could also switch into being a pro-oxidant. So my premise is aim for food. You and I are very much in the same camp. Colorful foods and diversifying those colors. So for women throughout perimenopause and then postmenopause, what I would say is aim for actually the full spectrum. I know we want to typically hone in on a color. The one color that most people don't get enough of is purple. And I can just tell you that from surveys and, whenever I have people fill out food logs, I'm looking at color. Purple is hard to get. It's a very seasonal color. So typically we see blue, purple, black. more in the autumn and closer into the winter months
Right.
and less, yeah. So it's more seasonal, but that's the color that people fall short on. And we do know that those purple blue compounds, like from blueberries, figs, grapes, raisins,
Mm.
even I just posted on my Facebook today, I found purple broccoli at the store. I always love when purple broccoli is in season. And I'm always
Yeah.
like, I, to me, that's like you're getting so much additional value because you're
And the
getting the
purple sweet
potency.
potatoes too. We got
Yes, purple sweet
right.
potatoes, the purple cauliflower, anything purple. Purple is precious. So when people see purple at the store, go for purple. Go for that purple variety because that will be the color that far and away that people have a lot of difficulty getting in their daily diets.
Are the same sorts of concepts applicable to men when they think about aging and their testosterone and the way, men have central fat and testicular function declines with aging? Do you have different approaches when you're talking to men versus women?
Many times it's about the individual, right? So you
Yeah,
kind of have to see
sure.
what they're taking in. And if they're really high on brown, yellow, and white, which most people are, there's a lot of opportunity there for the rest of the spectrum. But I can tell you just separately from people's daily diets and just looking at the scientific literature, what men would most need I would say would be the red and the green. And I'll tell you why. Red usually tracks with adrenals, with prostate health. I think of the carotenoid lycopene, which many people already know about. In fact, part of my master's thesis was we did a study specifically on lycopene and oxidative stress. And even for men that are in their fertile years, I would say that lycopene can be protective and good for sperm health. You know, that the head of the sperm is actually very rich with a lot of different carotenoids. So when I think about fertility, men and women, I do think that these carotenoids are really important. However, for men, I think that the red is just a little bit more important. And then when I'm thinking of men and later in life, and I'm thinking about prostate health, I'm thinking about heart health, kind of that prostate heart access. I do think that bringing in some of the greens, green is the color of the heart in my system of the rainbow diet. So, leafy greens that would be rich in nitrates, like the healthy nitrates that the body converts into nitric oxide and opens up the blood vessels, and also folates, which are also important for methylation, which is important for keeping homocysteine low. Magnesium, also really important. So, if we just look at heart health and men and prostate and healthy testosterone, I would say these are some of the things to be focused on. I also look at maca. Maca is a tuber. It's a
Hmm.
plant that is native to Peru. And there are certain colors of maca that tend to be better for men versus women.
Let me go back for a minute to this idea of, our nutrients and their relationship to fat. We all have some fat. We all need some fat. It's an important storage. And we're in an era where a lot of people are losing their fat quickly with the help of GLP-1 medications.
Mm.
And there is, I know, in, our integrative functional medicine world, this concept of, well, we also store toxins in our fat. And what happens to those toxins when people are losing weight rapidly? And I know I have it on my shelf back here. You've also written books on detoxification, healthy ways to detoxify.
Mm.
What's your take on, this concept? Like, is weight loss associated with a risk of toxin release? And if so, is there something that people who are losing weight, who are taking these GLP-1 type medications or doing something else to lose weight, need to be thinking about to avoid harm from the toxins that are released?
That's a really good question. Very topical, and you're connecting a lot of dots, right? So you're thinking through it a little bit more because many of these toxins from the environment are fat soluble. So back to the fat tissue, right? Another good reason to have carotenoids in our adipose tissue to protect us from some of the inflammatory effects of these pesticides, insecticides, herbicides that get
Hmm.
trapped in our fat. So, to answer your question, yes, we do need to be thinking about it. Much will depend on the degree of toxin load for that individual, their portals of elimination, meaning how much are they urinating? How often are they having a bowel movement? How often are they sweating? Are they active? Are they hydrated? There are many different variables here. And what I would say is that while there isn't any literature that I have come across to look at people on GLP-1 agonists and looking at rapid weight loss and the liberation of these toxins into the systemic circulation, what we can draw upon is some of the literature that has been done on people that did bariatric surgery. And there are some studies showing that there was at least one study that comes to my mind. It's kind of an older one now, but essentially even a year out from all of that rapid weight loss, there was still an exponentially high increase of toxins in the blood in
Oh,
the
wow.
overall body system. Now you could say, well, but what about those people? Were they very healthy? Were they eating fruits and vegetables, and did they have nutritional density just in their daily diet, that sort of thing? There are many different variables that people can be thinking about. So one of the things that we teach in functional medicine is that metabolic detoxification requires nutrition. So a little bit of withdrawing from food in the evening hours, I think, can be good, kind of like a 2 to 3 hour time frame before we go to bed. But for the most part, during the day, when we are in our active hours, really important to be including protein, quality protein, healthy fats, and fiber in every meal as much as possible. And if we have difficulty doing that, stacking the deck with a smoothie that is chock full with all of those things, like earlier in the morning or as a snack, loading that up with a diverse blend of fibers and making sure that we've got our omega 3s and that we bring in that protein. Protein is getting a lot of attention lately,
Yes.
as you've seen as well. And while, we do need to look at the context of that and the individual, I do think that having a bit higher protein, or at least meeting one's protein needs, that's really important for ensuring healthy detoxification. And part of the reason for that is because detoxification is an enzymatic process, and enzymes are built from proteins, the different amino acids that we take in, right? So if we think of the gut, liver, the brain, the lungs, the skin, a lot of these different body systems are all detoxifying. So what can somebody do if they are embarking upon, maybe they're already on a GLP-1 agonist, and so they're having this weight loss? I would say to work with somebody like you, somebody trained in integrative functional medicine that can help them to be looking at their labs, to be looking at whether or not certain markers have changed. Things like GGT would be one simple one that could be on
Right.
a
Just part of the
very,
metabolic panel.
yeah, that would
Or,
be an easy
yep.
one. And
Right.
even the high level of GGT could designate that there is a bit more in the way of things like persistent organic pollutants in the body that the liver is responding to.
Mm.
So I do think working with a practitioner and it's just like, let's just go back to the conversation with perimenopause, right? So many women just venture into hormone replacement therapy without being cognizant that hormones also go through detoxification.
Right.
The body is running them through the same process, the same pathways that something like an environmental toxin would go through. So when women start to embark upon, what do I do as part of my menopausal journey? Do I take HRT or not? First, making sure, as much as possible, working with a practitioner who's skilled in the art of looking at estrogen metabolism and figuring out her gene variants as it relates to estrogen metabolism, right? Because otherwise, we could be embarking upon a longer term, I would say, influx of unhealthy estrogen metabolites that could be potentially carcinogenic. It
Yeah.
just depends on the ratio, and it depends on the person and so many different things, of course.
Yeah, I agree. I'm a huge advocate. I always have been, of using hormones. the bioidentical form. They
Hmm.
can be the FDA approved. I think that's great. It doesn't have to be compounded. I think a lot of women really benefit from the hormones, but it's not in a vacuum. You really, now I think out of desperation, so many women are just finding clinics online that prescribe it through telemedicine, and then I'll see these Facebook um, groups of people saying like, why am I having this? Why am I having this? And it's like, well, you need somebody who's really looking at you as a whole.
Yes.
And that idea of that estrogen detoxification, the importance of the liver, I personally love to do those kinds of tests, you know, like a Dutch test or one of those kinds
Hmm.
of tests.
Hmm.
But unfortunately, they're hundreds of dollars and they're not
Yeah.
covered by insurance. So sometimes we need to look at some of the other markers and a woman's symptoms just to see how she's doing. But I agree, like information is power for women. So I think that's just something to keep in mind.
Yeah.
Great that more doctors and practitioners are getting trained in menopause, but they may be getting trained in a very conventional way and missing the importance of making sure you're methylating properly and
Hmm.
detoxifying properly. So, yeah, I know I'm speaking to I know you and I are like
I'm
eye to
jumping
eye
up
on
and down
this.
inside. I want people to see you and practitioners like you because this to me is the more optimized way to do it. Because just like you said, there are all these women, they're scrambling now because they feel like they have been wronged and they weren't told the
Yeah,
information about HRT. Now let me hurry up and get on HRT, but then there's so much context. And HRT in its way may not be great for every woman at every certain time of her life. I mean, there's just so much nuance. One thing I hear what you're saying about the cost of laboratory tests, and I think some of the very skilled clinicians can tease out from symptoms as to,
yeah,
okay, this is
absolutely.
probably, I don't think labs are just hands down a requirement.
It is something I tell people a lot, because I'm trained in functional medicine also.
Yeah.
And patients will come in and they'll have a laundry list of all these tests that they want to do. And I'll be like, that let's be thoughtful and we'll
Mhm.
use the ones that make the most sense because you can get an overwhelming amount of information and then it's just,
Yeah. Well, just on
too
that,
confusing.
it can be confusing. There's one thing. Let me ask what you feel about an omega-3 index because I
Oh,
kind
I
of
love
feel
the omega-3
okay.
index.
Yeah, I do
But
too.
I'll tell you, that's one that actually I can now order through Northwestern's lab or an omega check.
Yeah.
So we have ways to do that. So it's an interesting thing because what I have seen, and I'm sure you have too, is that labs that used to only be in the functional medicine world, for example, testing the inflammation marker calprotectin in the stool, that
Mhm.
that's been in functional medicine stool tests for decades. And now it is standard of care in gastroenterology as a monitoring tool for inflammatory bowel disease, homocysteine levels as
Right.
a marker of methylation. Omega 3, that's another example, like these omega indexes. No, used to only be you had to pay out of pocket again. No, now they can get billed through insurance. They get ordered through usual labs. So it's an interesting and I think positive thing when we're starting to see these tests be more accessible.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And what we can learn just from the tests that we would get just through mainstream, just these lab tests, what can you infer from
Right.
that, right? So I think that there's a lot to be made from what we can already gather. But yeah, I like the omega-3 index. My PhD research was on essential fatty acids, which is
Uh,
so when I think of, across the board, women, men, different stages of life, I mean, if there's one thing that could be very empowering, I just feel that getting that omega-3 index right, because I have even seen that when people supplement, relatively healthy people in their, let's just say 30s to 40s, they're supplementing, their omega-3 index is still low. So then I'm
yeah.
thinking, either they're not absorbing, they're metabolizing, they're excreting, those levels are not high enough. And there's a lot more data coming out on that now, even like the omega-3 worldwide map, how just even the United States as a country just falls short collectively in something as basic to our anti-inflammatory potential like omega 3s. So I just wanted to toss that into the mix as a lab and also as just something to think about because omega 3s couple very nicely with those carotenoids because
Yeah,
of the fat
fat
soluble nature.
absorption.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, and the omega 3s, just for listeners who are not so familiar, those are those essential fatty acids that are found in fish oil. There, you can also get some versions in plants like in flaxseed, chia
Hmm.
seeds. But, I think the omega index or the omega check tends to really focus on these compounds like EPA and DHA that are primarily in the fish forms.
Yes.
Yeah, you agreed. Okay.
You're
So,
right. But they have more extensive tests where you can get more
yes,
fatty acids. But I think for our purposes, what we really want to know is are you at 8% EPA DHA? That's kind
right.
of like the benchmark, right? So
Yeah,
the test is about $50 and you can do it at home even. And, so many people ask me, like, what supplements do I really need to take? And I keep taking these omega 3s. I don't know if they're doing anything. So that's why I like to kind of draw that correlate. If, the adage of don't guess, try to test when you can.
absolutely.
Yeah, especially with a supplement that is costing you money. But of course, we can get it from the diet as well. You just gave a lot of different dietary sources.
Yeah.
So, but I do think
Yeah.
it's an important feature.
I think the testing is also important because what I see is that, a study will come out in a cardiology journal, gets a lot of news. Oh, fish oil does not do XXS. And then, which always drives me a little crazy because, of course, these studies are focused on a single condition and don't apply to our whole health. And when we
Hmm.
look at that big study that came out recently about omega 3s being associated with longevity, I'm like, yeah, that just goes to show you we're not just looking at your heart. Omega 3s decreasing inflammation does stuff throughout the whole body. So when I recommend omega 3s and somebody goes to their cardiologist and they say, oh, yeah, that doesn't work, you should stop taking it. It always,
Yeah.
there's a little hair pulling there.
Well, I just go back to A and P, anatomy and physiology. I mean, look at the
Yeah.
basics. Every cell membrane has fatty acids in it. So the ability of that cell to perform well, to transport, to release toxins, to get nutrients in is all dependent. Even your neurotransmitters, how they move from neuron to neuron, it's all dependent on the composition of that cell membrane to a large degree. So getting the foundational elements of our anatomy and physiology in place with those omega 3s and looking at the prostaglandin synthesis cascade. I mean, this is like
hmm
textbook stuff. So it just feels like it's just one of the good starting places, I think, for people to go from.
I wanted to talk about one other phytochemical, I guess you'd say, and hormone that you've been into a lot lately. You've been publishing a lot, and it's very relevant to women and men and just aging in general because sleep is such an issue. And that I'm sure you're guessing because you cannot is
Yeah,
melatonin.
I love
And
melatonin.
so, yeah, I know. Yeah, I can tell you are like all over melatonin. So, what can you tell us about melatonin, both through diet, through its importance to our health? Like what do we need to know about melatonin?
Well, let me just help your listeners to fall in love with it like I have. So, if we just back up a little bit as to what is melatonin, melatonin is an ancestral molecule. It's everywhere, it's in nature. So, that's my first premise. Is the molecule nature derived? Like, do
hmm
plants contain melatonin? Yes, they do. Do our bodies contain melatonin? Pretty much every organ system of our body has melatonin except for hair and nails, like things that aren't like living. They're right. So, like, our immune system is connected to melatonin. Our mitochondria are connected to melatonin. Our brain, obviously, the pineal gland. So, melatonin, there are many different, we produce melatonin, but we produce it from different parts of the body in response to different functions. So, the one thing that most people think of when they think of melatonin is sleep, which is kind of a pigeonholed, I would say, function of melatonin. It actually isn't really responsible for sleep. What it's responsible for is circadian rhythm,
hmm
synchronization, right? So as our eyes perceive dim light through the course of a day moving into nighttime, there are certain cells in the eye, and the eyes are part of the brain. There are certain cells that are looking for the absence of blue light. And when that happens, that sends a signal to a certain part of the brain, like this cluster of neurons in the brain, suprachiasmatic nucleus, which then sends a signal to the pineal gland, this little gland like in the middle of our heads, that will then secrete melatonin throughout the body. So that master clock of that suprachiasmatic nucleus is saying, okay, let's get all of our cells in rhythm. It's a beautiful philosophical process if you think of it, right? Because it's almost like when we are out of balance with nature, we have a built-in mechanism to get us back on track, and it is through melatonin. Now, how does our pineal gland make that melatonin? If we back it up biochemically, we see that it comes from tryptophan. Tryptophan is an essential aromatic amino acid, meaning it comes from protein. So things like turkey and a variety of different plant and animal sources in which we can get tryptophan. But our bodies need that tryptophan so that we can then convert it to serotonin and onto melatonin. So if we get enough tryptophan, we will be potentially good with creating more of that melatonin, but just naturally through our life cycle, much like menopause, andropause, there is melatonopause.
Mm-mm.
So when children, if we look at the peak of melatonin endogenously from the pineal gland, it's highest for children. So children, in my view, they're set on melatonin. Like if they're doing all the right things and not having devices at night and distorting that perception of light by the eyes, they're going to be good in melatonin for the most part. There are some exceptions, but for the most part, whatever you had as a child was probably your highest level of endogenous pineal melatonin. Then when somebody goes through puberty, just I would say there's kind of this downward slope, just like we would see with most hormones. And so what we see, like our colleagues like Dr. David Perlmutter and people in the neurology space are starting to, in fact, I was on his podcast twice talking about melatonin because there's interest there as it relates to looking at risk for neurodegenerative diseases, right? One other function, well, melatonin has multiple functions, but one function that I'm going to be presenting on in a month or so is the role of melatonin in the lymphatic fluid flux. So what that means is that when we are sleeping, one of the reasons why we sleep is in order to allow the brain to clear itself of toxic metabolites. Like our brain is really busy. Like right now, you and I talking, our brains are working. We are, changing protein expression and neurotransmitters. We've got a lot of metabolic activity. So when do we get a break? When do we need to clean house? That's when we're sleeping. And if we look at the peak between 2 and 4 a.m., this is when melatonin is at its highest. And this is also when glutathione is peaking, glutathione peroxidase, superoxide dismutase, catalase, a lot of these antioxidant defense enzymes. And if you look at some of the preclinical work, what you see is that melatonin seems to be an important agent for helping with that removal of those toxic metabolites from the brain. Now, melatonin is not the only thing. Omega-3s have been talked about, coincidentally, just bringing them up again. Also, like the sleeping position that you're in, sleeping on your side, especially your right side, would be helpful for that lymphatic fluid circulation because, the space in the brain, the interstitial space is expanding by 60% when we sleep in order to allow convection into that fluid. So then the lymphatic system around the glial cells starts to collect into the lymphatics. So in the morning, back to detoxification, we want to be urinating. We want a bowel movement. We need to drive that stuff out of the body ultimately, right? And not recirculate it. So I gave you a long-winded answer on melatonin, but
Yeah.
I
And
just want,
even, you didn't even get into, which I know is
I
another
know.
huge area, is the antioxidant effect and how it's being
Yes,
used in oncology as an
that's
adjuvant
right.
treatment. And yeah, so but I've learned a lot of other reasons to love melatonin. I do think it's interesting that it peaks at 2 to 4 because that's when women typically in perimenopause have
I
their
know.
awake period. Is that a melatonin deficiency that's happening for them?
Here's my hypothesis. We don't know. The short answer is we
Okay.
don't actually know that for sure. But because it's so involved in the rejuvenation and repair processes, if a woman is going through menopause, she could have more inflammation, so more neuroinflammation
Hmm.
even. She could have, now we start to look at toxin load, and maybe there's just more physiologically and metabolically to accommodate. So there's just more activity at that time if we're trying to repair, right? The other thing I want to mention is that melatonin, some people, when they take melatonin, they report that they have vivid dreams and they don't like
Hmm.
that.
Yes, yes.
But it's actually, I think it can be a very good thing. It's extending the REM state, the dream state. And during menopause, a lot of things come to a head in our lives when we enter into perimenopause, right? We start looking at our lives more thoughtfully. Maybe we're empty nesters, we're looking at our jobs, we're looking at our meaning and purpose. Like there are some things psychologically that are going to come to the surface. And sometimes that happens in our dream state. I think that melatonin, if I look at it, I call it the molecule of consciousness, the
That's
very
beautiful.
yin. And I also call it the mother molecule because it's so closely tied to the mitochondria, which is maternal in the way of its genetic origin, right? So I think that dreaming, if we have vivid dreams, bad dreams, I feel like it's good to get into that space. And if we can work with people to kind of take us through that process, especially through the menopause when a lot is going to come to the surface, it's
Hmm.
almost like we just need a full spectrum team. I mean, you're trained in integrative health as well. So looking at all different aspects of a person, like physical, emotional, mental, spiritual,
Absolutely.
energetic, not just physical. There's
Yeah.
so much more to who we are.
I could not agree more. I'm going to just ask one last question. So, if you could leave the listeners with one piece of wisdom to help them reach their next level of health, what would that be?
Eat colorful foods, live a colorful life.
Oh, beautiful.
Really connect to color in the way of make eating enjoyable, artful, and soulful. I mean, I know we touched on labs and numbers and counting, but then there's also this other aspect of that life and healing is an art. And how do we bring more of that joy into our everyday lives? So that's what I would leave everybody with.
Yeah, joy and play. That's great. Thank you so much. Well, from phytonutrients to personal healing, Dr. Minic reminded us today that food is information and inspiration. So if you're ready to add more color to your plate and your life, check out her new book, check out her studies, check out her website, all kinds of information. If you love the episode, please take a time to rate and review us. It helps more listeners discover next level health. Make sure to hit subscribe. You can also follow me on Instagram at Dr. Melinda Ring. I'll share integrative tips and sneak peeks of the upcoming guests. And don't forget again to just live a colorful life.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you for joining me on this episode of Next Level Health. I hope you found some inspiration and practical insights to enhance your wellness journey. Don't forget to leave a comment on YouTube or review on Apple Podcasts. I'd love to hear your thoughts and suggestions for future topics or speakers. Be sure to follow Next Level Health with me, Dr. Melinda Ring, as we continue exploring the path to healthier, happier lives together.